few years ago, as a technological dinosaur, I look at my laptop, I wouldn't even know how to do things. I would be asked to do a presentation, I wouldn't know which. But then I realized I risk being left behind. You know, a lot of things are happening. So becomes very important for people to adapt quickly to the fourth revolution and the change that is bringing. And one of the things that we also need to embrace is the digital storytelling, and also how then do we fine tune it and make it better. So I think it becomes crucial for all the media houses that are worth their salt, that still want to generate revenue, to migrate to the positive spin-offs that comes out as a result of under fourth revolution, which has brought about things like AI. It is very important for a newsroom to invest in the tools of trade which are amenable to the changes that you want to see. So yeah, the time is now to adopt innovation technologies that have been brought about by AI.
Imagine a world where we have gender equality and equity in and through media. That is our work at African Women in Media. I am Dr. Yemisi Akimbobola, and this is Her Media Diary, a podcast that captures the lived experiences of African women working in media industries. In this episode, I am joined by Ruth Butaumocho, an award-winning Zimbabwean journalist, gender and development trainer with over 25 years of media experience. As a journalist, Ruth has dedicated over a decade to gender reporting, using her platform to highlight the issues facing women in Zimbabwe. Her personal experiences with domestic violence have fueled her passion for advocating for gender equality and empowering women through writing. She discusses the challenges and opportunities that come with adopting new technologies in newsrooms, emphasizing the importance of digital transformation in staying relevant. Throughout this series, we'll be in conversation with African women who have redefined media sustainability through their various capacities. By inviting these voices into conversation, we hope to provide solutions to break down barriers faced by African women in media industries. Thank you so much for joining me on this conversation, Ruth. Just for our listeners, we've had a few trial and errors before we could get this platform going. So I'm really pleased that it's able to happen. So thank you. Ruth, you're a prominent Zimbabwean journalist with decades of experience in media. And I'm really eager to hear about your journey because you're serving as managing editor of the Herald. You've had over 10 years experience as a gender editor. So there's so much for us to kind of catch up on. And you're also the current vice president of the Media Institute of Southern Africa, Mr. the Zimbabwean chapter as well, and recognized through several awards, including the CNN Multi-Choice Awards. So
yes.
So it's really a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Doctor.
Now, but before we get into all of those accomplishments, you do know that I like to start with getting to know my guests and thinking about your early years.
Yes.
So it'd be really great to hear your background. Who's Ruth? What do we need to know about you that we can't find on Google?
Okay, so Ruth is a mother of two lovely daughters, born and bred here in Zimbabwe. And I grew up with my dad in the urban city. My mother used to stay in the rural areas. Things were really tight then, so we could not all afford to stay in the city. So my major inspiration in my life was my dad. He made me realize that for me, education was very important. So as I navigated my way through primary school, secondary, I knew really how important education was. So my father was the biggest influence. He's now late now. So most of the things that I'm practicing today are as a result of the strong foundation that I got from my father. He was the biggest inspiration in my life.
So was that in Harare?
Yes, that was in Harare. I did my primary, secondary, and tertiary education in Harare. Staying in one of the highest high density suburbs called Mufakose. I'm sure it was during those formative years that I realized how important it was to really achieve my aspirations, dreams, and move away and attain a better life for myself. Yes.
Yeah. So, but you mentioned earlier on that your mom was in a separate environment to you. So, can you give us some context to that.
Okay, so I'm sure you appreciate that most people in Zimbabwe they survive on subsistence farming. So my father was employed in the industrial area as a spray painter. Naturally, I was not earning enough to sustain myself and my siblings. As a result, my mother had to confine herself in the rural areas where she would partake in agriculture and do other things to sustain my father's salary. So that has always been the setup, even up to this day. She has always lived in the rural areas, and once in a while, I'd go to the rural areas during the holiday, where she also actually managed to emphasize to me how important education was to me. By the way, let me just say how important education was to me. She went as far as what is called standard 6. She's just an ordinary basic housewife, so she really also wanted me to attain the best in life.
So, what was, I mean, you've talked about the influence your dad had on you, but also, I guess, your mom, in many ways, even though she wasn't physically there with you guys in Harare, there was that
Yes.
influence as well, right? Tell me more about
Yes.
that.
Yeah, so I think both of them are really eager to have me get a good education. But above everything else, I'm sure for my dad really wanted me to focus much more on school. I do have a disability, by the way. I've got polio on my right leg, so I should really say your first husband is your education. But on the other hand, my mother also had aspirations that at some point in time I would settle down, get married, and also get a good job. So I think collectively, both of them really played a part in who I became to this day.
Mm. Tell me about your journey with polio, your experiences.
Okay, so for me, I got to appreciate discrimination at a very young age. Like I said, I went into a high density school primary where I think most of the kids then were able bedded. I'm sure I was like a novel situation in my community because I think among my peers, among the people that I went to school with, I was probably the one person was disabled. But come to think of it, Dr. Yemisi, it never really demotivated me. If anything, I considered it as an advantage that in as much I was not able to run when it was raining, in as much as I was not able to take part in sport, but I knew then my strength was in academia. This is when I really learned to really curate my journey towards what I wanted to do. So although I could not run and play with any other kids of my age, at least I was able to succeed in class. And succeed in class I did. Was from grade 1 to grade 7. I think I was attained first or second position. So much that my teacher saw the leadership skills in me, the academic excellence. And I remember when I finished my grade 7, I was the head girl at that school. So in as much as I really had a disadvantage, but to me again it worked as an advantage because I was able then to focus and concentrate on my education.
All right. So clearly you've had some really, interesting early years experiences, and you're telling me there about your, how, for example, your disabilities with polio didn't deter you from that determination to succeed.
Yes, 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 yes.
I'd love to hear you talk more about that.
So you see, I knew I was ably different from other kids. I could tell when people would get into groups, coalesce around their friends. So I'll be left out in so many activities at school and even at home. And my parents would say, "Don't do this because of that. You can't date because you're disabled." So I realized that my life was conformed to a lot of limitations. The physical aspect of things I would not be able to partake. But then I then gravitated towards things that I was capable of doing. And I realized at a very young age that I was able to organize people into groups. I would always be able to volunteer to do something. If the teacher comes in, they want someone to rub the board, I'll be able to volunteer. If we didn't have a school monitor, then if they wanted someone to volunteer, I would volunteer. I realized that I was meant for servant leadership. I would go out of my way. And as a result, that made me stand out in front of other kids, although I had a disability. And come to think of it, I became a prefect as early as grade 4, when people would be chosen at grade 5 up to grade 7. So by then, in my early formative years, I knew how to become, I'd already become a leader. So being disabled did not really deter me. Of course, sometimes I'd really feel low about it when people were being chosen to go and represent a school because they were athletes. they were in choir. I knew I wouldn't be able to be included. But then I would also focus on things that I was able to do. So as early as grade 4, I was now in leadership. I was now in prefect. It did not come as a surprise when in grade 7 I was chosen to become the head girl. And because I was coming again from a very disadvantaged family where my mother was staying in the rural areas, I didn't have the basics like other kids what they would have. Nice satchels. I remember when I was being what we called installed to become a head girl, I didn't have a blazer, Dr. Yemis. A friend had to lend me a blazer for that particular incident. So for me, this became the rallying point for me to do better in terms of my academics. And I developed that ability to look within myself when I had problems, because I knew I was different from other kids. So other kids wouldn't really understand. They wouldn't understand when it was raining that I would not be able to run when it was raining. So from January to December, I'd always be prepared with either a small umbrella or a raincoat, because I knew I needed to come up with inside solutions for my situations.
Wow. So you're really taking kind of control of your circumstances,
Yes,
especially, right? In the face of, what otherwise would have been. I mean, you were experiencing some form of discrimination. Even then, you were very resilient, right? And I suppose all of those demonstration of finding your solutions, taking leadership,
yes,
contributed to then eventually in the year that you were then selected as prefect, head girl, etc., because of those demonstrations of your abilities. How did that make you
yes.
feel when you got to that point where the school was selecting you for such a role?
It really made me proud of myself. I realized at some point that I was not useless at all, like what people, the perception that people had. It made me realize that I could actually do more, and if I could only focus on things. So even when I went into secondary school, I already knew that I had a strength in me that other kids didn't have. I didn't have nice things, nice lunchbox, but still there was something within me that would really make me outstanding. And I rallied on that, Dr. Yemis. Even when I went through the secondary schools again, we had a lot of co-curricular activities. I focused on things that I knew wouldn't require physical strength. And one of the things that I focused on was playing chess. So I went into chess because I knew I would do chess whilst I was seated. And during that time of trying to find space for myself within secondary school, I actually excelled in chess. It was one hobby or one game where there were not many girls in chess. So I really also kept my niche within that respect. And come to think of it again, so my leadership skills, they excelled. They went beyond primary school. When Form 6, 11 was doing lower 6, I was the head girl for my school. I was also a junior counselor for the city where I was living in. So I already knew that I'd managed to find a niche for myself. I didn't have to excel. I didn't have to try and convince people that I could do things physically. I told myself that physically things are not meant for me. I could actually excel elsewhere, and I did exactly that right up to tertiary institution.
Really interesting, really inspiring, like how you kind of turned what could have potentially be a detrimental kind of reaction to how society was taking you into a positive story of you actually, like you said, emphasizing your ability and really finding that thing that you can excel in. And your leadership is demonstrated throughout in different phases of your life. And I suppose it's no surprise then that you're in the position that you're in now, right? What sparked that interest in journalism?
Okay, so when I was in primary school, one of our cousins, she's still a radio journalist. She was a radio. Then they used to be called the disc jockeys. They were not called radio presenters. So I used to work for an educational radio station. So I developed an interest. And remember, I had already told myself that I needed to gravitate towards things that did not require physical fitness for me to excel. Being a policeman was out, being a policeman or woman was out, being a nurse. So I realized that I could actually do much better if I was a radio presenter, because I had been to a workplace 3 or 4 times. I'd find a seated on the desk, operating a machine, and that really steered the passion within me to do journalism. So when I was in Form 3, there was a radio program that was being done during the school holidays, where people would come in and read their novels and read their books. So she made sure that I got a slot to do poems and read novels throughout. So I'd already found something that I was really passionate about. I loved listening to my voice when I was on radio. My mother in the rural areas, she would sit under the tree and they just say, guess what? We heard you on radio. And for
Wow.
me, that was like a starting point of making life better for myself. So by the time I finished A level, I already knew that I wanted to become a journalist. So when I went for my tertiary education, so unfortunately I could not major in broadcasting because then Zimbabwe had one radio station then, and there were limited opportunities in terms of getting an internship place, and there were so many other challenges. They wanted a limited number. From our class of 30, they only wanted five people to become
Wow.
broadcasters. So I ended up majoring in print. That's how I ended up being a journalist. So I did print for my national diploma. I did a degree in media studies. Then I was doing print. I did postgrad and then eventually my master's. I then realized that I needed to venture into into print where there were better opportunities than in broadcasting.
Interesting. So for over the last 10 years, you've been a gender editor. I'm really interested in
Okay,
understanding
so
that
how did I
journey.
become in? So, Dr. Yemis, when I started dating, I got myself my boyfriend when I was in Form 3, but then the parents didn't approve of the relationship. They didn't really think it was going to amount to anything. So, as time went on, I eventually got married to that guy. I was a friend of my brother. But during the course of my marriage, I experienced serious abuse, physical violence. This guy would beat me up, would deny me access like to my cell phone. So I started writing about trials and tribulations of what women go through in different spaces. So it started off as a passion. I was just writing about women. I would sometimes use pseudonyms, but I'll be chronicling my own experiences, my own marriage. So my passion for writing about women grew. I would look around me. I would see there were so many women that had so many challenges. But then the structural systems within our society or in the country did not allow them to fully express themselves. So much that people would actually see me walking, they'll say, guess what? Something happened to someone. Would you think would want to write about this? So over time, I'd written about a lot of articles. I was actually an entertainment reporter, but with time, I was now focusing more on writing about women, violence against women, gender abuse within marriages. So when the time came, I think when there was some kind of a structural change within the newsroom, my editor then realized that I was passionate about gender. They decided to actually create a gender desk because of the stories, the number of stories that had been written, that I've been writing about over the years. So that's how I ended up becoming a gender editor. Let me say, being a gender editor was one of the most exciting times of my journalism. I got to interact with a lot of people. I'll be surprised that even the people were very empowered in terms of their professional capabilities. They were also being abused in their own respective places. So much that when I left my marriage after 13 years, I was even inspired more to write about my own personal experiences. I ended up anchoring a blog called Gender Forum. So for me, gender was a passion. It's not something like I was being paid. I enjoyed every moment of my journey as a gender editor for 10 years. So you can imagine how disappointed I was when I was then transferred to another desk.
Mm. But it's interesting again. I think there's a consistency in your story, though, about taking harrowing situations and turning that into something quite positive.
Yes,
So, your
yes,
own story of domestic violence and how you've been able to make that into a career that lasted for over a decade.
10 years.
You know,
Yes.
how does that make you feel? And especially you spoke there about the support of others who have been through your gender desk and how their personal stories kind of came into what they were
It
doing.
really made me realize that I was doing a lot more than just doing my job. These are the kind of stories I would write without even hesitation. I would go beyond the normal working hours. It made me realize that I actually had a part to play. For me, it was no longer just about my job. It was about servant leadership. In as much as I was being paid to write about these stories, I felt I had an obligation to go out there in the rural areas, identify stories that makes women cry, stories that makes women smile. For me, it became like a hobby beyond my It was just more than a job. And during the course of my interaction with women, I realized that, contrary to the perception that women were weak, were not capable, could not excel, they were actually could do much, much more, but then they were not given opportunities either in their communities or even in political leadership. And it also made me realize that I also had a part to play in ensuring that their narrative, their stories are put in public domain.
And I suppose over the 25 years you've been in the industry, you've witnessed several shifts. You've talked about your own shifts in terms of what you've gone on to do, but how about things around technology and the adoption of AI in newsrooms compared to, what has been your experience of that in that transition?
So my experience again, for me, women is my. Talking about women is my story. I'd want to look at women, Dr. Emis. I've realized that, you'd be surprised that women from various sectors, whether they're in the urban or rural areas, they are likely to adopt to a technology faster than men, but the biggest challenge is they don't have the gadgets. So in 2013, I attended one of the meetings in some rural areas outside Harare, and I saw just two women with a small smartphone who were able to share and teach others about how to use a basic ordinary phone. So much that the story inspired me to write about how technology has revolutionized the life of the ordinary women. And women tend to gravitate more towards new inventions, but the biggest challenge is they don't have the means and resources to migrate. But then when it comes to men, I've got so much respect for men, Dr. Yemis, but sometimes they tend
Yeah.
to slowly adapt to situations. But their biggest advantage is they are equipped with the means of resources so much that it becomes easier for them to quickly adapt to technology and make use of that. Although I would believe if things were equal, if we could narrow the gender divide, I would like to believe women were likely to adapt to more and faster to technology than men.
We know how important it is to have diverse voices and perspectives in our stories. And that is why we developed Source Her, a platform designed by African women in media with the support of Foyer Media Institute to connect journalists and female experts from across Africa. Whether you need a female data scientist, a health professional, engineer, aircraft expert, or someone who can bring fresh, innovative ideas to your story, Source Her has you covered. The platform boasts an extensive database of talented women, making it easier than ever to find the right fit for your story. And it's not just about filling positions, it's about promoting diversity and inclusion in and through the media. So go to sourcer.com to discover and interview female experts across Africa. Together, let's promote adequate inclusion and representation of women in Africa. I mean, you spoke very importantly there about the issue of access, and not an issue that women do not want to use these technologies, but it's an issue of access in a variety of ways. But also speaking from kind of the other side of um, concerns around AI perpetuating other forms of bias, particularly gender bias in the newsroom. What are your reflections on these emerging technologies, especially when we're still tackling issues of access with the basics of mobile phones? What are your concerns when it comes to now this AI and other emerging technologies?
So I think when it comes to the newsroom, for instance, I'm sure a lot of newsrooms or maybe a lot of media editors will agree with me when there was when we went into the fourth revolution, we were looking about the emergence of other technologies like AI. It was a given that men were the first, male journalists were the first to be taken aboard to be trained on use of artificial intelligence and other things. The assumption being they were likely to learn faster and improve the newsrooms. And as a result, we have had, even up to this day, men have been equipped much faster than us as female journalists in the newsroom. Companies, in particular case, my company spent more trying to put men on different courses, but as women, we are still waiting for opportunity to get access to this training course. And as a result, you realize that there's still that not only the gender divide within, there's no you already realize that.
So I suppose there's two things for us to kind of, there's lots we can build up on this, but there's two ways in which I want to reflect on this. One, in terms of the preparedness of journalists for the integration of AI and that skills gap that you're talking about. That sometimes it's not a skills gap due to a lack of interest or ability, but due to the prioritization of certain men over women, for example, right? So there's that aspect. And then there's the kind of operational aspects in terms of the potential impact of AI in content, and whether it's gender content and other things. So let's start with that day-to-day operations of traditional newsrooms like the Herald, right?
Okay.
So how do you see AI shaping the day-to-day operations of traditional newsrooms like the Herald? And are there specific areas that where AI has made the biggest impacts?
Okay, so for starters, let me say that there have been fears and hopes on the uptake of AI in the newsrooms. For starters, there are also fears that people are likely to lose their jobs as media managers become so comfortable using AI. So there's an element of hostility in some sectors where they feel that we don't really need to use AI because we are likely to lose our jobs. If anything, from the information that we have been getting or they've been saying, they're saying, look, do we really need AI? For us, it's a monster. We'll actually wake up one day, we all lose our jobs. In my newsroom that I work with, there are about 60 of us, 45 reporters, 22 subs. So people are busy thinking, are their jobs secure in terms of if we're going to use AI? But on the flip side, again, we have also started using AI as the herald. 2 years ago, we're having challenges of dirty copy. Would make mistakes every day, and the following day would actually make retractions, apologies, because we get spellings wrong, some facts. So, but all following the coming in of the AI, we are now able to come up with a cleaner copy. We are also now having to type and say, look, we want an infographic on genocide in whatever you're able to provide. Operations have become smoother in terms of how we work. We're actually working smarter because we're now spending less time doing the research. We are now have to ask Meta, are you able to do this for us? And in one of our newspapers, which is doing podcasts, it's in Bulawayo, that's the second largest city in Zimbabwe. They're actually now using AI called Alice to read the news for their podcast. They say they've realized that listeners are now interested in the type of news because they're now using AI for the news. They're also now using AI for other aspects, like in terms of for us, graphics, and sometimes when we want to imagine how the now river is like, but we don't have an idea, we make use of AI in terms of improving our graphics information and on the website. But I'm also within the same space. Let me also hasten to say that we still have got challenges on navigating around. Our media managers have been insisting that we need to use AI, but another challenge is that we still have to have our photographers, reporters being trained on what exactly is AI, where are the benefits, how can we use it, and so forth and so forth. So we are almost like in a transitional period. There are other people that are still trying to resist. Those who've embraced, they still lack knowledge on how best they can move forward so that AI can actually make their life easier and much smoother than before.
And so when we connect that, I mean, so that you've spoken about some real concerns. In one aspect, there's the concerns of job loss, and I guess part of
Yes.
that is the extent to which we are. I mean, it's natural, I guess, when new technology comes out that it does phase out some aspect of work, and I suppose it's down to an awareness that actually there are AI will still need a human being behind it to an extent, right? Um, but I think when we connect it back to what you were saying earlier on about the gendered aspect in terms of the female journalists and the extent to which they're given same access to training, given your background in gender and development training, how do you think AI can help or hinder gender equality through the media?
So I could actually say how it can hinder gender in the newsroom. Like for instance, already people are stampeding for the few existing opportunities, and more often than not, the preference is often given to male journalists to protect this. And as a result, you realize that in as much as we want to adopt and embrace AI, female journalists are more often, right now as you speak, they are left behind. What the opportunities, the few opportunities that are available are being given to men. But I'm sure if there were opportunities for gender in the newsroom, it would really assist women to work better and smarter. Remember, most women have got responsibilities in their homes, their children. So it means if you're going to use AI, it means they're going to spend less time working on stories and have enough time to focus on their families and so forth. In addition to that, I think to also expose them, to open them to a lot of other opportunities which they normally don't get when they have no access to artificial intelligence. And I've also realized that over the years, in as much as information has been available on internet, it has not been reaching women, female journalists as it were. So if you're going to use AI, it means then women are able to get more, get exposed to a lot, because now they're now left to, in a click of a button, their life will be very easy. You remember, we sometimes say women are often given softer bits in the newsroom because it is perceived that they don't have time to work on their stories. But with the use of AI, it means everybody even can now do geopolitics because now they've access to information. They now have just to request, and then the information will be available at the tick of a button.
But AI itself is being, I mean, bearing in mind that again, there are humans behind the production of these AI tools, right? AI itself is being accused, and the producers of these AI, of kind of perpetuating existing stereotypes, existing gender bias, existing all forms of bias, whether it's race and other forms of protected characteristics, right? So I guess to what extent do you see that playing out in your newsrooms? And perhaps in relation to the other stuff you talked about in terms of the skills gap, can you give us what are the kind of things you're seeing being done to mitigate some of these more negative aspects?
So I think that is going to be a little bit difficult for maybe for the transitional period. In a country like ours, for instance, in Zimbabwe, where people are adopting AI gradually, it's very difficult to discern which is genuine and which is not. So much that you might actually be, like you said, ending perpetuating the stereotypes knowingly or unknowingly. So I think we're in that period where we still have to ascertain and really figure out how it is going to help the newsrooms and in trying to do away with the stereotypes. Again, it's a new area where which we are trying to adopt and also acclimatize. But what the beauty about is AI also avails an avalanche of information. It's entirely now up to an organization, depending on their structural issues, to be able to discern what is real and what is not real. Well, the other day we were talking about the deep facts within AI. So that again, it will need a level of education within the newsroom so that they're able to discern or maybe to tell the difference on what is genuine and what is not now. But for now, we are working in the woods. We are not yet sure where exactly how we are able to how will you be able to quickly acclimatize to AI because of the challenges that I've mentioned before. Training is still being selectively afforded to a few individuals. So it might take us longer than necessary than other countries to really get to a point where we are saying we now appreciate that AI can actually also perpetuate stereotypes, can also turn racial issues. We are in a space where we need to learn as much as possible. So it would be so difficult for me at the moment to say whether we are going to face the same scenarios within media in Zimbabwe because we are. Let me say we are still lagging behind in terms of the AI.
I mean, when we think about the integration of digital platforms like AI with your area of specialism around gender reporting, and then some of the kind of contentions around biases, then it raises quite a few questions there, doesn't it? What are kind of your reflections of that integration?
Already, I've already seen. I'm not saying AI is a monster. I've already have situations whereby there've been defects. People's should I say pictures have been played around with. You actually see someone who was dressed formally. The next thing is these are journalists with an incident here in Zimbabwe where one of the journalists for a private media organization was said to have sent some nudes to a minister here. But it actually turns out that it's not true. She was actually dressed formally, but then the pictures were played around with. So to some extent, I can also see challenges as far as female journalists or women are concerned, because we are also going to see an abuse of some sort of AI when it's supposed to be helping people. It's something that you really need to guard against. And working in an environment or in a gullible society where we are right now, that picture went viral that she was actually naked. But come to think of it, someone had played around with the graphics and it had almost like the graphics showed looking naked. These were like nudes that had been sent, but in actual fact, that was not the case. And when it was later revealed, few weeks later, when she had been traumatized, it turned out that there had been some tampering of AI, of the use of graphics to give that narrative. So for where I stand right now, my wish again is I wish more women would be able to at least to embrace AI so that they are also able to see how it works and guard themselves against the so-called fakes, and then they'll be able to also to differentiate what is genuine and what is not.
But I mean, you're very right to start that statement, this answer with that statement that I'm not saying AI is a monster, because that is not what we're saying here, right? There are the positives to AI, and there's also things that we need to make sure we are not repeating with the technologies of previous, right? And this example of gendered disinformation that you gave of this journalist whose picture was edited, and it was a form of technology facilitated kind of sexual violence in a way, right? And so there is that aspect. And I think also beyond what you said about, empowering women journalists, there's also the responsibilities of the platforms through which these things have been pushed, and their responsibilities in terms of accountability and monitoring to make sure these things are tackled. So there's a whole load of issues emerging that were existing pre AI, but that is also now feeding into the movements,
After.
the development of AI as well, right? So, and that's for me one of the biggest concerns is, as we move forward into this new phase, which is already here, how do we make sure that we're not going to be having to have the same conversations we had when social media started and when the World Wide Web started, and we're still having those conversations that we were having in the 90s, right? But with a new technology. But on a more positive side, there are positive use of AI. And I guess for you as an editor, I'm sure you would have some advice for newsroom leaders to mitigate their hesitancy in adopting AI. So, how would you respond to that? What would be your advice to news leaders to encourage them in the use of AI, and how you would approach it to in a more positive way?
I think for starters, we need to be on the same launch pad of information. Information needs to be availed to everyone so that we get to appreciate what the positives that the AI can do for us. There's need again to educate our people on the positive spin-offs for AI. In addition to that, we also need to appreciate or actually encourage our cadres that, contrary to perceptions that the AI is going to swallow our jobs, we need to embrace it and actually unpack what it has to offer for our people and generations to come. We also need to realize the so many benefits that are accrued when the newspapers that use AI. In other media organizations in Zimbabwe, not ours per se, they've actually started to generate adverts through use of AI. So instead of just having as many sales reps, they now make use of AI to at least algorithms and just look at the number of people would want to do adverts in how many people would visit the salon in a particular day. So does that mean there's a huge market out there? It has actually helped us to identify even the type of stories that we need to be focusing on. It's no longer cumbersome for us to sit down and crack our heads in the diary conference saying what kind of stories should you need to look for. Algorithms of the stories that you're writing really point us to the stories that you should be focusing on, because these are the areas where people really want to be, the kind of stories that they want to read. So there are so many benefits, but then what we just need at the moment, we need capacity building. We need a mindset shift to understand and appreciate there's so many advantages that are accrued to artificial intelligence.
Absolutely. And you made a very important point there about sustainability, about media sustainability, and financial models, etc. So, what would you say about that in terms of that sustainability of media and AI and its potentials, alongside other automation tools?
So I'll give you my example of our own newspaper. It was started in 1890. I don't know, more than 150 years ago. But in the last
Wow.
3 months, we hired consultants from the UK. We are now migrating from the print. We are now with what is called the digital first strategy. We realize that
Mm,
we are not giving people what they want. Our readers have already miles ahead. They've moved ahead in terms of the expectations of what they want to read. If anything, they're way ahead of us in appreciating artificial intelligence. And as a result, we've taken a robust and progressive move to ensure that our first port of call is to look at the digital strategy and how do we embrace artificial intelligence to ensure that we also work on the numbers on our social media platforms. We also generate interest using AI on our online website as the Herald. We also look at multi-digital journalism where we're actually focusing on things that AI has to offer us to generate interest. We feel that gone are the days where we just go out there and take a picture, still picture, bring it
Yeah.
and put it in the newspaper. People are no longer keen on that. They now want to have as many innovative ways of digital storytelling for what has become the immediate thing that we are focusing on. And come to think of it, we actually started restructuring our newsrooms on the 1st of September because we feel that we are left behind in terms of technology and embracing AI. Other newspapers are actually getting so much mileage in terms of their sales, in terms of the kind of stories that they're using, because they've allowed AI to assist them in storytelling and they've been getting the benefits.
I mean, and this is really vital because I mean, the Herald is over 100 years old. So
Yes, it
you're
is.
part of the legacy media. So to be making that investment on such a big change, what has that journey been like for you? And are there any lessons that you'd like to share with similar media organizations who are still tentative about making that step?
A few years ago, as a technological dinosaur, I would look at my laptop. I wouldn't even know how to do things. I would be asked to do a presentation. I wouldn't know which. But then I realized I risk being left behind. You know, a lot of things are happening. So becomes very important for people to adapt quickly to the fourth revolution and the change that is bringing. And one of the things that we also need to embrace is the digital storytelling and also how then do we fine tune it and make it better. So I think it becomes crucial for all the media houses that are what they're sold that still want to generate revenue to migrate to the positive spin-offs that comes out as a result of under fourth revolution, which has brought about things like AI. It is very important for a newsroom to invest in the tools of trade, not only just telling people that they need to do, but also invest in terms of the tools of trade which are amenable to the changes that you want to see. Podcast is the new, maybe podcast has been there for years. I was telling you that I miss this is my first time to be on podcast, but I'm already years behind in terms of trying to adapt on things that are very important. So yeah, the time is now. The time is now to adopt to new innovation technologies that have been brought about by AI.
And I think it's not lost on me that a lot of this development in your organization is happening under your leadership as managing editor. So, what has been your personal experience of having to lead your organization through this?
There's been a lot of resistance, let me tell you. But when we look at our figures every day, it's not making sense. Some point we said we are no longer a growing concern. I don't think we are going anyway. We risk losing this paper to a lot of changes that have been coming up. I'm in charge of what is called a monthly productivity report, where I need to record how many stories as a reporter written online, how many pictures have they taken, how many
Mm.
videos have they done, and I can see the level of resistance is high. But we are still like in a transitional period. We've really made it clear that either people come aboard in terms of trying to adapt to the emerging changes or they risk being left behind. So yeah, there's still a long way to go. I'm also happy that this organization, Women in News, One Infra, for the past
Yeah.
4 years, they've been taking us through steps to adapt AI. So this is where some of my strength has been coming from in leading the people. At least I've got an idea and appreciation, and I'm telling them if we manage to invest in this, at least there's a future somewhere. So it has been a
Mm.
difficult moment, but I can safely say we'll definitely get there.
So, what does the future look like for you?
The future is digital. The future is digital. The future is digital. We need to move fast and be at par with other organizations, other countries that have already moved behind. We always give ourselves as an example of Kenya, the nation Kenya. They've done so much. I'm sure they went digital, I think about maybe 20, 15 years ago. So we feel that we are already lagging behind, but I think the future is digital. We need to move with the fourth industrial revolution. We need to embrace AI.
Thank you so much, Ruth. It's been such a pleasure speaking with you today. And hopefully, your first podcast experience was a positive one.
It was fine. I really enjoyed talking to you. It was so engaging. Thank you, Dr. Yemis.
Thank you so much. Ruth's story begins with her childhood, where she grew up in Harare, Zimbabwe, with a father who instilled the importance of education and a mother who worked tirelessly to support the family. Ruth learned early on the value of perseverance. Despite facing the challenges of living with polio, she excelled academically and developed leadership skills that would serve her well in her future career. As we look to the future of journalism, Ruth's insights serve as a reminder of the resilience and determination required to navigate this ever-changing landscape. Her journey is not just about personal success, it's about paving the way for future generations of journalists, especially women, to thrive in an industry that often presents barriers. Send me an email at emc@africanwomeninmedia.com with your thoughts. Don't forget to let me know if you'd like to join me in an episode of this podcast. To find out more about African Women in Media, visit our main website at africanwomeninmedia.com. In the show notes, there's a list of organizations and resources to support you if you've experienced any of the topics we've discussed today. And don't forget, subscribe and follow Her Media Diary on your favorite podcasting platform. Also, tune into our partner radio stations from anywhere across Africa. And don't forget to join the conversation using the hashtag Her Media Diary. Her Media Diary is a product of African Women in Media, an NGO advocating for gender equality in the media industry. And this episode was hosted by Dr. Yemisi Akimbobola, produced and edited by Blessing Odob as part of a 5-episode series on media and sustainability. All music featured in this podcast is by Nana Kwabena. Thanks for listening and join us again next time.